Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Samach Tes, Daf 69 of Masechta Ayruvin. So today's Daf, we are continuing discussing. We begin off on the discussion of the Zadukee in the Mavoi. So the question of can a Zadukee be mevatel his reshus in a Mavoi or not? We talk about, does a chazaka work in a mavui, right? If people in a mavui make a chazaka there, they take things out into the mavui, does that kind of claim it for them so that somebody who's mevatel's reshus cannot undo it? Does that work or not? Then we kind of pivot into the sugya about a mumar. A mumar is somebody who does averos, like a yid who does averos. So how do we relate to that? And then we talk about kind of some sugyas that we've been talking about recently, which is the dynamics of one yid being mevatel his reshus to other yid in his chatzar. So chevra, we are going to see all this stuff on Daf Samach Tes of Masechta Ayruvin. Let's go weiter. So we're going to start on Daf Samach Ches, 2 lines from the bottom. So we're in the middle of this machlokas really between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda about what Rabban Gamliel's opinion was, kind of, right? So there was that story in our Mishnah on Daf Samach Aleph Amud Beis, all the way at the beginning of the parak, where Rabban Gamliel says that a Zadukee is able to be mevatel his reshus, and he says that there was a story. Well, Rabban Gamliel doesn't actually say that a Zadukee could be mevatel his reshus. He just says that there was a story that involved his family, that in Yerushalayim there was a Zadukee who lived in his mavui, and his father would tell them, go out with some things into the mavui immediately when Shabbos begins, because this Zadukee was mevatel his reshus. He said that I'm relinquishing my rights to the mavui, and therefore Rabban Gamliel's family would not have to worry about him in the Eruv. But Rabban Gamliel's father would instruct them, run out quickly with some items to make a chazaka in the chatzar, so in the mavui, so that this Zadukee can't, before he ends up bringing his things into the mavui and sort of demonstrating, whether intentionally or not, that he's reclaiming this mavui, and then they wouldn't be able to carry there anymore. So clearly, this is demonstrating that according to Rabban Gamliel, a Zadukee would be able to be mevatel his reshus in a mavui, and also that if you can make a chazaka in the mavui, that if once Shabbos begins, you would take some items and go out with them into the mavui, sort of claiming this mavui for yourself, so then the Zadukee cannot undo that. That is Rabbi Meir's version of what happened with Rabban Gamliel. However, Rabbi Yehuda's version is that actually what Rabban Gamliel's father instructed them was that you better do whatever you wanted to do in that mavui, you better do it before Shabbos, because once Shabbos begins, you can't carry anymore, because this Zadukee is going to create a mess for you. It can't be mevatel his reshus. So that is the way that Rabbi Yehuda understands Rabban Gamliel's opinion. Okay, so essentially Rabbi Meir is saying that a Zadukee would be able to be mevatel his reshus, and just that Rabban Gamliel, his family, they would take things out into the mavui immediately when Shabbos begins, so that they can make a chazaka, so that the Zadukee can't undo his bittul. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is that a Zadukee cannot be mevatel his reshus bichlal, and therefore Rabban Gamliel's father was saying, hey, if you guys have stuff you want to do in the mavui, you better do it before Shabbos begins, because otherwise we're not going to be able to carry, because this Zadukee is messing things up for us. Now, 2 lines from the bottom of Samach Ches Amud Beis. Omar Mar, we said earlier, Hotziu ma sha'atem motziin, ve'achnisu ma sha'atem machnisin, ad shelo yotzi ha'to'ev hazeh ve'yasser aleichem. So, this is Rabbi Meir's version of things, which is that this was coming from the Brisa, that Rabban Gamliel, in the Brisa's version, it's not Rabban Gamliel's father, it's Rabban Gamliel himself talking to his children, and he says, right, take out whatever you're going to take out, take in whatever, bring in whatever you're going to bring in from the mavui, until this Zadukee, this nudnik, brings things out into the mavui via asar aleichem and demonstrate that he really wasn't mevatel his rights to use the mavui, and then you won't be able to use the mavui anymore. So therefore, Rabbi Gamliel, in the Bryce's version, Rabbi Gamliel is instructing his children, take things into the mavui quickly before the Zadukee has a chance to. But that is implying that this would work. That's implying that if Rabbi Gamliel's children would take items and bring them out to the mavui before the Zadukee gets a chance to bring things into the mavui, they would make the chazaka first, and he can no longer mess things up. V'atnan, but we learn in a Mishnah, and this is a Mishnah we're going to see later on today. It's on Samach Testamud Beis. Mishanasan reshuso v'hotzi. Somebody who is mevatel is reshus. Somebody who said to the other people in his chatzar, look, I'm relinquishing my rights to the chatzar. V'hotzi, but then he ended up taking things out from his house and bringing them into the chatzar. Bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid, whether this happened on purpose, whether this happened by accident. Oser divrei Meir. He is going to say, so that's going to mess up his bittul. His bittul is now null and void, and now nobody else can carry in the chatzar. That is Reb Meir's opinion. So, we see that if somebody is mevatel is reshus, and then he takes things into his chatzar, no matter what, he's going to basically mess it up for everybody else. So why is Rabbi Gamliel assuming that as long as you bring things into the mavui first, then this Zadukee will no longer able to be able to mess things up? The Gemara is asking that it looks like, and that was Reb Meir's opinion in that brisa, right? And the Gemara seems to be asking that Reb Meir's opinion is that if somebody's mevatel reshus and then takes something out to the chatzar, he's going to mess it up no matter what. So Amr Rav Yosef Ema Eino Oser. So Rav Yosef says, well, let's just change around the Mishnah to say that Rabbi Meir is saying that if somebody is mevatel reshus and then takes something out to the reshus, to the chatzar, bein b'shogeg bein b'mezid, Eino Oser. He doesn't mess anything up. Okay, very nice. Abaye says, Lo kasha, no, it's no problem. And this I think is what I was assuming, and maybe you guys were assuming as well. Abaye says, that's not a good question, because the brisa that we had with Rabbi Gamliel is talking about when they already made a chazaka, and that's exactly what Rabbi Gamliel is saying to his children. What he's instructing his children: go out to the chatzar with your things so you can make a chazaka. Because once you make a chazaka in the mavui, well then the Zadukee will be unable to. Meaning, once they claim the mavui for themselves, the Zadukee will be unable to undo that. Whereas the Mishnah, when Rabbi Meir is saying that if somebody's mevatel reshus and then brings things into the chatzar, bein b'shogeg bein b'mezid, it messes it up for everybody else. That's because the other people didn't make a chazaka in the chatzar. And because there was no chazaka in the chatzar, they didn't claim the chatzar for themselves. Well, when he brings his stuff, whether it's by accident, whether it's on purpose, he's going to mess up their ability to carry in the chatzar. However, if they would have claimed the chatzar first, then he wouldn't be able to undo it, like we see with Rabbi Gamliel and his children. V'atanya, we learn in the brisa, Im ad shelo nasan reshuso hotzi. So if you have a yid and he's in a chatzar, okay, and so let's say you have a yid in a chatzar. There's 5 houses in the chatzar. 4 of them join in the Eruv, and one guy forgets. So now, but if before he says to everybody else, look, I'm just going to be mevatel my reshus in the chatzar, he brought something out into the chatzar. So bein b'shogeg bein b'mezid. So it's Shabbos right now, and he brought some. He didn't join in the Eruv, and he took something out of his house into the chatzar, which of course he's not allowed to do. So whether he did this by accident, okay, so it's an honest mistake, or whether he did this on purpose, which means that he's deliberately being mechal Shabbos, Yachol levatel, he could still, after having done this, say to the other people, look, I'm going to relinquish my rights in the chatzar to you. Divrei Reb Meir, that's according to Reb Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says, B'shogeg yachol levatel. If when he had brought his stuff out from his house into the chatzar, he did it by accident, well then he could still afterwards say, look, I want to be mevatel my rights to the chatzar to you fellows. But b'mezid, if he took things out of his house into the chatzar on purpose, i.e. was mechal Shabbos on purpose, even if it's midrabanan, eno yachol levatel he would be unable to now be mevatel his reshus, say to the other people in the chutzner that I'm relinquishing my rights to the chutzner to you, because he demonstrated that he's somebody who can't be trusted when it comes to halacha. Now, mishanasan reshuso v'otzi, if you have a fellow who was mevatel his reshus, right? He didn't join in the Eruv, and he says, look, I'm going to relinquish my rights to the chutzner to everybody else. Okay, very nice. V'hotzi, but then after relinquishing his rights to everybody else, he took something out of his house into the chutzner. Bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid, oser divrei Meir. Meir says that whether he did it on purpose, whether he did it by accident, it's not allowed. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, says Rabbi Yehuda, b'mezid oser, if he took these things out of the house into the chutzner after his mevatel his reshus in the chutzner, if he did it on purpose, well then it's going to be a problem, because he's showing, because he said that he was relinquishing his rights to the chutzner, and then he intentionally took things out to the chutzner afterwards. So that's going to mess things up for everybody else. But b'shogeg, if he did it by accident, eino oser, then it doesn't create a headache. By medvar mamurim, when do we say this? B'shelo ichziku b'nei mavui. That is only if the people in the other people in the mavui did not take things out into the chutzner first and sort of take ownership of the chutzner first. Aval hechziku b'nei mavui b'mavui. But if the other people first took things out to the mavui, bein b'shogeg bein b'mezid eino oser. So now whether this fellow who relinquished his rights to the chutzner took things out from his house into the chutzner on purpose or by accident, it makes no difference, because the other people already made a chazaka first. So we see that at least according to Reb Meir, if they would make a chazaka first in the mavui, so then this other person would no longer be able to to mess up their Eruv, like Abaye suggested. Amar Mai, we said earlier, Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'lashon acheres. The Rabbi Yehuda says slightly differently. Maru v'asu tzorkeichem b'mavui ad shelo techshach v'yaser aleichem. That Rabbi Yehuda says that what Rabbi Gamliel instructed his children is, quickly go do whatever you're going to do in the mavui before Shabbos begins, because once Shabbos begins, it's going to be too late, because this Zadukee is unable to be mevatel his reshus, and therefore you're going to be stuck with the fact that he didn't join in the Eruv, and you're not going to be able to use the mavui anymore. Alma nachriu, which means that we basically treat this Zadukee as a nachri, i.e., he's unable to be mevatel his reshus. V'ha'anan. But if we look in our Mishnah, what did our Mishnah say? Ad shelo yotzi tanan. Well, in our Mishnah, what Rabbi Yehuda says is that Rabbi Gamliel, well, in that case, his father was instructing his children, that according to Rabbi Yehuda, what he was saying is, you better use the mavui before Shabbos begins, because once Shabbos begins, inevitably, the tzedukah is going to take something out to the mavui, and he's going to mess up your Eruv, and there's nothing you can do about it, because Rabbi Yehuda says that chazakas don't work. Whereas Meir says chazakas do work, Rabbi Yehuda is saying chazakas don't work. Okay. So we basically have two conflicting opinions. One of them is saying that what Rabbi Yehuda is saying is that these people better do whatever they're going to do, whatever they want to do in the mavui, they better do before Shabbos, because once Shabbos begins, this tzedukah is going to mess things up, since he's not part of the Eruv and he's not able to be mevatel his reshus. The other way to understand it is that he's able to be mevatel his reshus, but inevitably he's going to mess things up. So, is he able to be mevatel his reshus, or is he unable to be mevatel his reshus? That is what we're trying to understand according to Rabbi Yehuda. So again, Omer Mar, we said earlier, Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'lashon acheres, maru v'asu tzorkeichem b'mavui. Rabbi Yehuda says that Rabbi Gamliel was instructing his children to quickly do things in the mavui ad shelo techshach, before Shabbos begins. V'yaser aleichem, because once Shabbos begins, you're not going to be able to use the mavui anymore, because you're stuck with the tzedukah, you can't be mevatel his reshus, and he's not joining the Eruv. Alma nachriu. So we see that we treat him like a non-Jew, that he can't join in the Eruv bichlal. And he can't be mevatel his reshus either. V'anan ad shelo yotzi tnan. But our Mishnah said that you guys better do things before Shabbos, because once Shabbos begins, he's inevitably going to take things out to the mavui and mess up your Eruv, and you can't do anything about it, because Rabbi Yehuda says that the chazaka won't work. So ema ad shelo yetzeh hayom. So the Gemara answers by saying that really Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is that a tzedukah is unable to be mevatel his reshus. So what does it mean that in the Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is telling his children that you better do whatever you're going to do in the mavui before the Zadukee is yotzi, before he takes things into the mavui, which implies that he would be able to mevatel reshus, but he's just inevitably going to mess it up. So the Gemara answers, no, don't read it yotzi, rather read it yetzei hayom, meaning you better do things in the mavui before the day ends, because once the day ends, you're going to be stuck because there's nothing you can do because the Zadukee is unable to be mevatel reshus. So according to that reading, Rabbi Yehuda is consistent, and he holds that a Zadukee is unable to mevatel reshus. V'ibai sema, or I can give you a different reason. Lo kasha, it's no problem. Kam b'mumar l'chal shabasos b'tzina, kam b'mumar l'chal shabasos b'farhesya. A different way you can understand it is that there's no problem. It depends. If this Zadukee is somebody who is michal Shabbos in public, well then he's unable to be mevatel reshus, just like a non-Jew is unable to be mevatel reshus. But if he's a Zadukee and he's Michal Shabbos, but b'farhesya, but b'tzina, quietly in private, well then he could still be mevatel his reshus. Okay, fine. Kiman azla haditanya. Like who does the following brisa go? Mumar v'giloi panim areze eno mevatel reshus. That if you have a person who's a mumar, a person who does averis intentionally, as well as a giloi panim, as Rashi he calls him a mechutzaf, somebody who's chutzpahdik, somebody who's disrespectful. So areze eno mevatel reshus, he cannot be mevatel his reshus when it comes to the Eruv. The Gemara asks, giloi panim mumar have? So the Gemara says, why are we treating somebody who's chutzpahdik like a mumar? Okay, so he's a nudnik, but he's not a mumar. He's not somebody who does averus. He's not like somebody who's like consistently does averus intentionally. So mumar begiloi panim en yochel levatel reshus. So what we're saying is that no, what it means is that a mumar begiloi panim, somebody who does averus and he does it, in public. He does it in a chutzpahdik way, in a way that he's proud of it. And we're saying that in that case, he'd be unable to be mevatel his reshus in an Eruv. So come on, who's that like? Rabbi Yehuda, it's like Rabbi Yehuda who says that, or at least we're saying according to Rabbi Yehuda, if you have somebody who's a mumar l'chal Shabbos b'farhesya, he's unable to be mevatel his reshus. Hahu dinafak b'chumrasa d'medusha. So there was a fellow who one time went out to Reshus HaRabim on Shabbos and he was carrying a ring with like some fragrances on them. Now, that's carrying, right? We learned in Masechta Shabbos, there are certain rings you can take out and certain rings you can't. The question is, is it a tachshit or not a tachshit? That was the whole kasha there. But this was a ring that he was unable to take out. And he went out to Reshus HaRabim with it, so he was carrying on Shabbos. Came the chazye, the Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya, kasye. Now, then this fellow saw, oh gosh, there's Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya, I'm embarrassed. I don't want to be seen carrying on Shabbos, so he hid it. Omar, Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya saw that, and he said, Kigon zeh mevatel reshus l'Rabbi Yehuda. This is an example of somebody who is Mechal Shabbos b'tzina, who's privately Mechal Shabbos, that he's not blatantly going out and pronouncing to the world and not caring. He noticed that I was there, so he put it away. So that would be an example of somebody who's Mechal Shabbos b'tzina, somebody who's quietly Mechal Shabbos, and Rabbi Yehuda this is an example of somebody who Rabbi Yehuda would say would still be able to be mevatel his reshus to the chatzar. Amar Rav Huna says, Rav Huna, Ezu Yisrael Mumar. What is an example of a Jew who is a Mumar, a Jew who does averis intentionally? Somebody who considered to be a Mumar is somebody who doesn't keep Shabbos in public. It's Mechal Shabbos b'farhesya. Amalei Rav Nachman. Now Rav Nachman says to Rav Huna, Kiman, I don't understand, Rav Huna. Why just because he's Mechal Shabbos b'farhesya does that make him a Mumar? Ik Rab Meir, if we're going like the definition of Rab Meir, the Amar Chashul Davar Echad Chashul L'Chol Torah Kula, that somebody who is suspected or not able to be trusted when it comes to one thing, so then he is untrustworthy for all of the entire Torah. Well then, afilu be'echad mikol yisurin shebatorah nami. Well then, what's so special about being Mechal Shabbos b'farhesya? According to Rab Meir, if this person even there's one avera that this person violates consistently, so then he'd be considered a mumar. So what's so special about Shabbos? It could be any avera. Ikra banon, and if Rav Huna is assuming like the rabbi's interpretation, ha'amri chashud davar echad lo avi chashud l'chol Torah kula. But the Rabbanan say that just because you violate one particular thing, that doesn't mean that we suspect you regarding the entire Torah. Unless the thing that you violate consistently is avodah zarah, right? So, but not Shabbos, right? Shabbos isn't that one thing. So meaning, Rav Huna says that a Yisrael Mumar is somebody who's Mechal Shabbos b'farhesya. So now, Rav Nachman asks Rav Huna, he says, based on whose interpretation are you going? If it's like Rav Meir, or Rav Meir says that any avera that somebody violates, well then that would, I guess sort of intentionally, that would make him, and we can't trust him regarding that particular avera, so then we can't trust him for anything. Well then what's so special about Shabbos? It could be any avera. And if it's according to the Rabbanan say no, if there's one avera that's going to make you a mumar, it's going to be avodah zarah, not Shabbos. So what's the deal with Rav Huna? So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak litein reshus levatel reshus. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak explains Rav Huna that where being Mechal Shabbos b'farhesya becomes significant is in this context, in our context, in the context of can he be mevatel as reshus in a chutzner or not. If somebody's Mechal Shabbos b'farhesya, then he is unable to be mevatel reshus in a chutzner. If he's not Mechal Shabbos b'farhesya, so then he can, even if he's got other averis that he likes to do. And like we learn in a brisa, Yisrael Mumar Ameshamer Shabbaso B'shuk, a Jew who does averis, but he's Shomer Shabbos, at least in the public market, Eino Mevatel Reshus. So then he will be able to be Mevatel a Reshus in a Chotzer. V'she'eino Meshamer Shabbaso B'shuk, but if publicly in the market he is not Shomer Shabbos, well then Eino Mevatel Reshus, then he is unable to be Mevatel Reshus in a Chatzim, because they said Yisrael Notel Reshus V'nosein Reshus, that a Jew is able to accept permission in a Chatzar. If somebody's Mevatel their Reshus to him, he can accept that. V'nosein Reshus, and he can also give his Reshus to other people. He can Mevatel his Reshus. Uvenachri, but by a non-Jew, Ad Sheyaskir, he would have to rent. You'd have to rent space from the non-Jew. Keitzad, how does it work by a Jew being mevatel reshus? Omelo, he could say to his friend, Reshusi knuyalach, that my reshus, that my rights to this chotzer are being acquired to you. Reshusi mevuteles lach, or he could say that I am nullifying my rights to the chotzer to you. Kana ve'ein tzarich l'zako, so then this other fellow who gets the rights to the chotzer, Zeo, it's his, he makes this sort of acquisition and this kinyan, and that's it. He doesn't have to do anything else. Okay? So that was Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak's explanation, that when Rav Huna says that somebody's Mechal Shabbos b'farhesya, so he's considered a mumar, it means that he'd be unable to be mevatel reshus in a chatzar. Rav Ashi says, Hai Tanau de Chamira Ale Shabbos Kavod Zara. Rav Ashi says that actually there's a brisa, there's a Tana who holds that Chilul Shabbos is just as severe as Avodah Zarah. And therefore, I can understand Rav Huna who says that somebody who's Mechal Shabbos b'farhesya, well then it's Kilu, he's a Mumar l'chol Torah kula, because being Mechal Shabbos b'farhesya is just as severe as being Oved Avodah Zarah. So, Rav Ashi Amar Haitana, it's the following Tana, the Chamira Ale, Shabbos Kavod Zarah, who treats Shabbos as severely as he treats Avodah Zarah. Kedetanya, as we learn in a brisa, Mikem. So the pasuk says, Adam ki Yaakov Mikem. It's the second pasuk in Sefer Vayikra, and it's talking about bringing a korban nedava, a voluntary offering to the Eibishter. So it says, Adam ki Yaakov Mikem, from you, v'lo kulchem. But not everybody is able to bring a korban to the Eibishter. Prat lemumar, to exclude a mumar, somebody who intentionally does averis, so then he's unable to bring a korban nedava. Mikem, from you, bachem chilakti v'lo ba'umis. that specifically when it comes to the Yidden, there are certain people who are able to offer a korban and certain people who are not. But when it comes to the non-Jews, anybody can offer a korban to God. I mean, anybody can come to the Beis HaMikdash and bring a korban nedava. We don't say, are you doing X, Y, or Z? But by Yidden, we say, not everybody can bring. Mina be'ema, from the animals, lahavi b'nei adam adomin lebehema, to include even people who are similar to animals. What does that mean? Mikan amu, from here they said, mekavlin korbanos miposhe Yisrael kadesh yachzru b'tshuva, that meaning even people who are acting like nudniks, they're acting like animals, even they can bring a korban. We're going to have to explain what this means. But even we can even accept korbanos from them, miposhe Yisrael, from the Yidden who sin, kadesh yachzru b'tshuva, so that they'll do tshuva. Right? We don't want that somebody should come to bring a korban, and we're going to say, no, you can't bring a korban because you're a nudnik. No, we even let nudniks bring a korban so that they'll do tshuva. Chutz min mumar v'amenasech yain, and then we say the exceptions being somebody who's a mumar, and somebody who is menasech yain, he does avodah zarah, v'amechal shabasos b'farasya, and somebody who's mechal shabbos b'farasya. Now we're going to have to break down this brisa, because there were like a few different sections of this brisa in terms of defining who's allowed to bring a korban and who's not. So agufa kasha, this doesn't make any sense. It's contradictory. On the one hand, Amart, you said mikem v'lo kulchem lo tzisa mumar. On the one hand, you said that mikem, from you, from not everybody can bring a korban. A mumar, somebody who intentionally does averis, he cannot bring a korban. Okay. But then you said mekabel korbanos miposhe Yisrael. But then it says that we dafka do accept korbanos from people who sin because we want them to do tshuva. So halo kasha, this is no problem. Reisha b'mumar l'chol Torah kula. The reisha is talking about, the first part of the brayso is talking about somebody who transgresses all of the entire Torah, so he cannot bring a korban, just a voluntary offering. Mitziyasa b'mumar l'davar echad. The middle case is talking about somebody who there's one avera, I guess that he has a hard time with. But in that case, we can accept a korban from him. But ema seifa, but then the brisa continues and it says, chutz min mumar, that anybody can bring a korban except for a mumar, v'amenasech yayin, and somebody who does avodah zarah. Hi mumar echidami, what's this mumar that we're talking about? I mumar l'chol Torah, if it's talking about a mumar for the entire Torah, that he violates the entire Torah, Hainu Reisha, but we already know that from the Reisha. We said in the Reisha, in the first part of the Brisa, that somebody who's a Mumar l'chol Torah kula can't bring a korban nedava, a voluntary offering. And ila davar echad, but if we say it's talking about a Mumar for just like one particular thing, Avera, he has a hard time with, but Kasha Mitziyasa, but that's going to be a problem because in the middle we said he would be allowed to bring a korban, so that he'll do tshuva. So how could we say in the right after that he wouldn't be allowed to bring a korban? So elalav achi ka'amar. It must be that this is what we're saying in the Seifa. Chutz minam mumar lenasich yain ulchal shabbasos b'farhesya. That we say that somebody who has an issue with one avera, so he can bring a korban, except if that one avera is avodah zarah or chilul Shabbos b'farhesya. Alma, from here we see avodah zarah v'Shabbos ke'adad eninu shmamina. So we see that avodah zarah and Shabbos are equally severe, as we see that when it comes to bringing a korban, the exception is somebody who is Mechal Shabbos b'farhesya or is Ovid Avodah Zarah. So we see that you can be a Mumar l'chol Torah kula even if you just Mechal Shabbos b'farhesya, and that could be the explanation of who Rav Huna is going like when he says that Mumar Yisrael is somebody who's Mechal Shabbos b'farhesya. Alright, Chaver, new Mishnah. Anshe chatzur sheshachach echad men v'lo erev. Oh. So you have people in a chutzner, right? Let's just say 5 people in a chutzner, okay? So you have a chutzner, I'm just going to give in our example, we'll have 5 people in the chutzner, and then they all made an eruv, but one person forgot to participate, okay? He's going to mess it up for everybody else, right? Because they didn't all come together to make an eruv. One guy didn't participate, he messes it up. But what he can do is, he can be mevatel his rights to the chutzner, to everybody else, and say, look, I don't have rights to the chutzner for Shabbos. It's all yours. Problem solved. And so what happens? So beiso aser milahachnes umilahotzi lo vilahem. So now his house now becomes off limits, right? Because he's not mevatel the reshus to his house. He's only mevatel his rights to the chutzner, not his rights to the house. So therefore, he's not allowed to take anything in and out of his house because he relinquished his rights to use the chatzer. They can't take things in and out of his house because he wasn't relinquish the rights to his house. Okay, so his house is kind of off limits, but v'shaloim mutarin lo v'loim. But they would be able to take things in and out of their own houses into the chutzner because they have complete control of the chutzner. And the interesting thing is, even this fellow can take things in and out of the other houses into the chutzner and the Gemara is going to explain why. Nasnu lo reshusan. What if instead of him being mevatel his rights to the chutzner to everybody else actually was mevatel their rights to the chutzner to him? So hu mutar ve'en asurin. So he is going to be able to take things in and out of his house, but that's it. Nobody can take things, certainly not out of their own houses into the chutzner because they relinquished their rights to the chutzner, but they even can't take things out of his house into the chutzner, even though they all relinquish their rights to him, and it's all just his rights, and we're going to have to understand why. Hayushnayim osun zelzeh. If there were still five people in the chutzner, and then 3 of the people were mevatel their reshus to 2 of the people, so that is not going to work. She'echad nosin reshus v'notel reshus shnayim nosnin reshus ve'notlin reshus. Because, if you have one person, he's able to be, to be mevatel his reshus, and he can also accept bittul, meaning if other people are mevatel their reshus to him, great. Shnayim, but 2 people nosnin reshus, they can be mevatel to one person, but ve'ein notlin reshus. They can't split rights because we know that if there's 2 people who have a chutzner together, and they don't join together, well then you can't carry. So therefore, if everyone's mevatel their reshus to 2 people, well, still the rights are split by 2 people, and you're not going to be able to carry in that chutzner. Fine. Me'emasai nosnin reshus. When do you do this whole reshus thing, like being mevatel reshus? Bishama says this would have to happen before Shabbos begins. This whole bittul thing would have to take place before Shabbos begins. Bitzil says it can even happen on Shabbos. Okay? Mishanasan reshuso v'hotzi. Now this we saw earlier today. Somebody who relinquished his rights to the chutzner, but then he took things from his house into the chutzner. Whether he took things out of his house into the chutzner on purpose, whether he did it by accident, it's going to basically uproot or undo the fact, invalidate the fact that he was mevatel his rights to the chutzner, because he clearly just demonstrated that he's still using it. Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'mezid oser b'shogegenu oser. Rabbi Yehuda says, well, it depends. If he intentionally takes things from his house into the chutzner, then yes, certainly he's demonstrating that he really was not relinquishing his rights to the chutzner. But if it was by accident, then the Eruv could still remain intact. Says the Gemara, Beiso hu de'aser hachatzero sharia. So we're saying that if you have 5 people in a chutzner, let's say, 4 of them joined in the Eruv, 1 of them forgot. So we say that he can be mevatel his rights, he can relinquish his rights to the chutzner, and then they'll all be able to use the entire chutzner, including his portion, but they would not be able to take things in and out of his house. The question is why? Heichidami. How is this? Idibatil. If this fellow was in fact mevatel his rights, well then beiso amai aser. Then why are they unable to take things in and out of his house? Either lo batil, and if he wasn't mevatel his rights to the chutzner, well then chatzero amai sharia. Why are the other fellows able to use his portion of the chutzner? So hacha b'may askinan, the Gemara says, what are we talking about? Kigon shebita reshus chatzero v'lo bita reshus beiso. So we're saying that he was mevatel, he relinquished his rights to the chutzner. He didn't relinquish his rights to his own house. Because Sabi Rabbanan, the rabbis told him, mevatel reshus chatzero, that somebody who relinquishes his rights to his courtyard, reshus beiso lo bitel, he doesn't relinquish rights to his house. To dire inish bebayis below chutzner, because a person can live in a house without a chutzner, no problem. So therefore, the other members of the courtyard can use his portion of the courtyard, but they cannot take things in and out of his house because he retains the rights to his house. V'shelayin muter lo v'layin. But we say that he, nonetheless, would be able to take things in and out of the other people's houses, in and out of the chotzer from their houses. Just not from his, because he relinquished his rights to the chotzer. But he'd be able to take things in and out of their houses. My time outcome, says the Gemara, because he's their guest. He's their guest. They're allowed to have guests. And therefore, once he's mevatel, once he relinquishes his rights to the courtyard, well then he could take things in and out of the other people's houses into the courtyard as their guests. He just can't take things from his house into the chotzer because he relinquished his rights to the chotzer for his things. Nasnu lo reshusan hu muter vein asurin. So we say that if the other 4 people relinquish their rights to the chotzer, and therefore basically the entire chotzer is this one person's, so we say that he's allowed to take things in and out of his house into the chotzer, but they would be unable to take things in and out, certainly not from their house, but not even from his house. But the Gemara says, just like we said that when he relinquishes his rights to them, he could take things in and out of their house as a guest, why don't we say that the other 4 people could take things in and out of this fellow's house as his guest? So the Gemara answers, Chad legabe chamisha ve'oreach chamisha legabe chad lo avu orchen. So the Gemara answers, well, when one person is mevatel is reshus to 4 people, so one person can be the guest of 4 people. But it's a stretch to say that the 4 people are going to be the guest of the one person. Now the Gemara right now wants to assume that what's going on in this Mishnah is that this one person forgot to join in the Eruv. So he's mevatel, is reshus to everybody else, and then the Mishnah is continuing and saying, and then afterwards they are then mevatel, their reshus to him, which would then be an indication that mevatlin v'chozin mevatlin, as we were talking about yesterday, that you can relinquish your rights to the chotzer, and then the other people could relinquish it back to you, which was Rav's opinion. So the Gemara says, no, achi kamer nasnu lo reshusan meikaro. So the Gemara says, no, it's not what the Mishnah is talking about. The Mishnah is not talking about where first he relinquished his rights and then they relinquished it back. They relinquished it to him. That's not what it's talking about. It's talking about 2 separate cases. One case is where he relinquishes his rights. The other case is where he didn't relinquish his rights. Rather, they relinquished their rights. So it's not a continuation and it doesn't prove mevatlin v'chozin u'mevatlin. Says the Gemara, hayushnayim osrin ze'al zeh. If 3 of the fellows in the courtyard were mevatel their reshus to 2 of the fellows, and now they're splitting the reshus, well, that's not going to work because they're still sharing the courtyard, and you can't share a courtyard. Everyone has to, own the rights together. So pshita, obviously that's not going to work. Interesting. So let's say that everyone was mevatel their reshus to Reuven and Shimon. And what we're saying is that now what happened was Reuven then turned to Shimon and said, look, I'm mevatel my rights to the chotzer to you. Still, that would not work. Ma'udatema, I would have thought to say, Lishtre, it should work. Because at the end of the day, Shimon is the only one with rights. So Kamash Malad, they came into Be'idna de Batil, Lo hava leisha yusuf b'hai chotzer, Lo. So what the chiddush is that even though Reuven turned around and said, look, Shimon, I'm also mevatel my rights to you, it's not going to work because at the time that the original 3 people were mevatel their rights to Reuven and Shimon, well, Shimon was unable to use the chotzer because it was still being split with him and Reuven. So therefore, their being mevatel, their reshus to Reuven and Shimon doesn't work, and therefore Reuven doesn't have the ability to be mevatel everybody else's rights to the chotzer and transfer their rights to Shimon as well. He can only transfer his own rights, but he can't transfer the other 3 people's rights, and therefore it's not like everybody who's mevatel their reshus to Shimon, and therefore it doesn't work. Now the Mishnah continued and said one person is able to be mevatel his reshus, and also some other people can be mevatel their reshus to him, but 2 people are able to be mevatel their reshus, but they cannot receive the bittul of other people, because then they're splitting it amongst themselves. The Gemara says, Hasu lamali. Why does the Mishnah have to say this? I no sein tanina. If the point is to teach me that one person can be mevatel reshus, we already know that from our Mishnah. I no tel tanina. And if it's saying that other people can be mevatel reshus, there reshus to one person, and he could receive this bittul, well, we also know that from our Mishnah. So the Gemara answer is seifa, it's tuichalei. The chiddush is really for the seifa for the next part, which is shnayim nosin and reshus, that two people are able to be mevatel their reshus to somebody else. Hanami pshita, well, this is also obvious. Well, Ma'udetema, I may have thought to say ligzar, to say that actually two people would be unable to be mevatel their reshus to somebody else, because dilma asi levatule lehu kamashman. Because I might think that, well, if two people are mevatel to somebody else, maybe I'll be concerned that other people mevatel their reshus to two people, and we know that won't work because they're still sharing it, they're still splitting it, so that won't work. Kamashmala, no. What it's teaching us is that two people can be mevatel their reshus, and that's okay as long as you don't have other people being mevatel their reshus to two people, because then they would be splitting it and it wouldn't work. You have to you would have to be mevatel their reshus to just one person. Unless, of course, there is an Eruv, right? So, like, for example, when you have one person who's being mevatel his reshus to the other four people, well, they already made an Eruv. That's the way it works. Okay. So that was Daf Samach Tes of Masechta Ayruvin. So we talked about a Zadukee being mevatel his reshus. Rav Meir says, yeah, he's allowed to be mevatel his reshus. Rav Yehuda says that a Zadukee is unable to be mevatel his reshus. Well, that's one way of understanding Rav Yehuda's opinion. The other way of understanding Rav Yehuda's opinion is that it actually depends. If you have somebody who's Mechal Shabbos b'farhesya in public, well, then he cannot be mevatel his reshus. But if he's Mechal Shabbos, if you have a Zadukee who's Mechal Shabbos privately, well, then he would be able to be mevatel his reshus. We talked about, does chazaka work in the case of a chatzar, right? Because we had Rabbi Gamliel saying to his children, at least according to Rabbi Meir, that go and take things out into the mavoi before the Zadukee has a chance to, because then, just make sure that you kind of take ownership of the chatzar of the chatzar or the mavoi first. So Rabbi Meir says that the chazak would work. Rabbi Yehuda, at least according to one way of understanding Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, is that he's arguing and saying that chazaka doesn't work. Okay, fine. We had Rav Huna who said that a Yisrael who is a Mumar is talking about somebody who's Mechal Shabbos publicly. And Rav Nachman asked, I don't understand, what makes you think that somebody who's Mechal Shabbos before Yesya would be considered a Mumar? So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said that it's specifically in the context of being able to be mevatel reshus, that if you have somebody who's Mechal Shabbos before Yesya, he's unable to be mevatel reshus in a chatzar. Whereas Rav Ashi says that it talks about a korban nedava, that if you have somebody who's Mechal Shabbos before Yesya, he's unable to bring a voluntary korban. And then we got into this new Mishnah where we've been talking really about inyanim that we've been getting to recently, which is one person being mevatel his reshus in the chatzar to other people. Right? So we say if he's mevatel his reshus in the chatzar, so then they can carry in and out of their houses, but even he can carry in and out of their houses, just his reshus is off limits, and right, his house is off limits. And if they're all mevatel their house to him, well then he can carry in and out of his house, but nobody else can carry in and out of his house because they're not considered his guests, because four people wouldn't be considered the guests of the one person. Cheva, that was Daf Samach Tes. I hope you enjoyed it. Peace out.